Hi all, sorry this video is late. I will get into why on Feedback Friday. I spare you the time now because it's already late. I wanted to talk about this Cornerstore Caroline thing because it intersects with a lot of stuff we're dealing with in gaming. Specifically, when is it appropriate to make an accusation? How much evidence do you need to make the accusation? How far do you escalate an accusation? And how do we identify bigotry when we see it? Because I mean, man, even this week's Supergirl was dealing with how difficult it is to identify any sort of bigotry as actual bigotry when it happens, precisely because you can't see into someone's heart and know for certain what their motivations are. It's sort of a preponderance of evidence standard, and it gets really messy. But let's get into the story, and hopefully you'll see what I mean as I go along. A white woman called the police on a black child she wrongly accused of sexual assault. After being confronted with video footage, she apologized. Now, a couple clarifications on this article, which does come from Business Insider. She did not use the word sexual assault in the video. She said the kid grabbed my ass. But she was wrong about that too. Video footage from the store showed that it was actually his backpack that brushed up against her backside. He did not deliberately grab her. But there's more to the story. She did not, and there's a link to the article if you want to read it. There's tons of articles out there, but this was the part that I'm like, this next part. If you watch the original video, she wasn't just calling the police. Yeah, she called the police about the kid. She called the police because not only did she believe a 9-year-old boy grabbed her ass in some sort of sexual power play, but that his mother was aggressive. Now, let's split this into two parts. I'll try to make this as quick as possible, but let's split this into two parts. And part of the reason this video is late is I wanted to actually check certain things to be sure. Now, I'm not going to cite papers for people who are all snaky about that stuff. This is a consensus. I didn't want it to be just one article. That's not the way science works. You have to find out what the best evidence, what scientific consensus is on any given thing. And one thing I wanted to know about was when developmentally kids actually become aware of the idea of sex as something they want to do. And the general consensus is puberty. Now, when do kids start becoming aware of sex? That's a little bit more complicated. But even the most controversially progressive sex educators believe that you should start talking to your kids about sex around the age of 10. 10. This child is 9. So you see a little boy, and this has happened to me, and that's part of what I guess made me feel more strongly about this situation. Unfortunately, I have had my ass grabbed more times than I can count, mostly at Comic-Cons, which is part of the reason I've been so bullish on defending gamers and their attitudes towards women, because after years of getting groped at Comic-Cons, I started going to gaming conventions, and strangely, I didn't get groped at gaming conventions. There's less of a feeling of entitlement at gaming conventions, I have found. But as someone who has been groped enough times to have a significant sample size, you know when it's a deliberate grab and when it's just somebody accidentally brushing up against you. brushing up against you happens. It feels completely different than someone deliberately grabbing you. So, this woman is obviously afraid of the world if she couldn't differentiate there. But then you feel somebody touch your backside, you turn around, and you see a child. For most people, this should not be a threatening circumstance. And I say it shouldn't be a threatening circumstance because sexual assault is about power, not about sex. It's about this idea that you're just a piece of meat that people can just handle. You have no bodily autonomy. Now, a 9-year-old child, to most people, does not register as that sort of threat. I have multiple situations because of the size that kids are. I have friends with kids, and this one little boy, he's super affectionate. So he always comes up and he gives me a hug, and his face goes right here, right? And he's too young to think anything of that. He just wants to give somebody a hug, and that's where his head ends up. Some people be going, lucky kid, don't go there. But sometimes, when he's a certain size, instead of getting around your waist, he gets your hips and therefore your butt. But there is nothing aggressive or anything about that. He's just a really affectionate kid who happens to be, chest tight on me right now. This is not a threatening thing, and it's just sort of an amusing thing. Kids also are, they don't connect to bodies. They don't understand bodies in this sexual paradigm. So, the touching of body parts is not sexualized in the way this woman's complaint implies. And this is when we start getting into the question of, and hear me out, don't get triggered, don't freak out, okay? This is where we get into the first question here of, did this woman feel more threatened because the child was black? And I'm asking it in the form of a question because that alone is ambivalent, right? Some people will go, yes, absolutely. Some people would go, no, it was the touch itself. That in and of itself is open to some interpretation, but then you add layers. And this is how racism works, essentially, especially people who are not aware of their racism. And some people will say, how can you be accidentally racist? You actually can. You can have some attitudes that you don't realize are actually bigoted. They were attitudes you were raised with that you think are just things everybody knows. This is just the way the world is. And it's completely false. It's not backed up by anything except your own, in groups, stereotypes and bigotries. And I say that because not only was the child black, but the kid's mother was black. And you hear on the call that a guy recorded, the woman making to the cops, her specifically referring to the fact that not only did the kid grab her ass, but that the mother yelled at her. That was, she actually did say she was sexually assaulted. The exact quote is, I'll show you. I was just sexually assaulted by a child. The son grabbed my ass and she decided to yell at me, referring to the boy's mother. All right. The mother, this idea, I'm trying to find the thing where she actually used the word aggressive, because that is extremely important. And that's important. There we are. Though Klein told Fox 5 New York, right here. Though Klein told Fox 5 NY that she's not racist and phoned police because she believed the boy's mother was being aggressive. Now, why am I stopping here? Okay. Some people might be, what's the problem? Now, first of all, let's leave race out of this for a moment, okay? Let's just assume this is a purple person talking to a purple person, okay? Mothers are protective of their children. And they react when you accuse their child without evidence of something really bad. Because not only are you attacking their child, but you are also attacking their parenting. I don't know of very many mothers who take that calmly. They tend to yell. Now, I have seen plenty of white mothers yell at people for, accusing their kids of something. No one calls the cops. But this mother wasn't white. This mother was very likely black. They don't show a picture of the mother, but the child's black. Genetics, right? They don't say the kid was adopted. Accusing black women of undue or unnatural aggression is a racist stereotype. And the fact that this white woman is trying to get people to believe she's not racist, well, hanging on to this stereotype, at the very least, she is very uneducated in terms of racial sensitivity. And I would think to an inexcusable degree, living in a city as diverse as New York. There are a lot of black people in New York. I find it very hard to believe that someone reaches their mid-50s without knowing that referring to a black woman as aggressive is at the very least a faux pas, at the very worst racist. Don't believe me? There is a Wikipedia entry on the angry black woman. It is a known thing. And you see it in the Wikipedia article if you want to look. There are other places. I just used Wikipedia because it's common enough that it gets a Wikipedia entry. It's the relevance test, not necessarily the quality of the information here. But the angry black woman stereotype or the aggressive black woman stereotype goes back to slavery and the idea that black women were not like white women. They were less refined and in many ways less human because they were aggressive and dominant and masculine, and it just showed the inferiority of the race. It was calling black women aggressive was used to justify the exploitation of black people, to justify slavery. It's that natural law thing I talked about in Lady Bits. They came to this conclusion that it was just natural that white men would have dominance over everybody else and white women were lower on the pecking order, but they were still above black men and women and so forth. They came to this conclusion and then they went out and sought evidence to justify that conclusion. And so the idea that people were enslaved and treated very poorly, and they might be a little ticked off about that, was treated as proof of their inferiority. So perhaps Cornerstore Caroline had no racist intent. Believe what you want there. I have a hard time believing that part of the reason she called the cops wasn't because it was a black family. I really do believe that factored into her thinking. I admit I cannot be 100% certain. This is just my opinion. You are free to have a different opinion. However, we can all agree that she invoked a racist stereotype of the angry black woman in justifying what she did. And the worst of all of it is it turned out she was wrong. The kid didn't grope her. His backpack brushed up against her in what was likely a very narrow corner store aisle. If you've ever been to those bodegas in New York, they're quite small. I mean, everything in New York is stacked up on top of each other, but they're quite small. They're quite narrow. So it's completely believable that, a kid walking by somebody turned away from him to reach something on the shelf, and there's video footage. Like, the kid is proven innocent. It's that thing that never happens. You can actually prove innocence instead of proving guilt. He didn't do it. It was his backpack. So you can understand why the mother was angry that her child was just falsely accused. Never mind the charge, the additional charge that happens because of the racial tensions in America. If you're considerate of that and you realize you're in one of those circumstances, the goal of a white person in that situation, as far as I'm concerned, should be to de-escalate as much as possible, because you understand that, especially now in the wake of Charlottesville and all this stuff, people of color are on edge more than they may have been in recent history. But these historical wounds go back very far. And this makes me wonder whether we should stop talking about white privilege and start talking about white responsibility. I'm not talking about collective blame. I'm talking about understanding that people of color, especially Black people and Latin people, like people of South American descent or Central American descent, they have reason to distrust authority in America, and we should be sensitive to that. It is our responsibility to understand that if they are reactive, there are reasons. And just to be very clear, remember I said it tied into gaming. This is the same thing I practice. I recognize that my experience as a gamer has been influenced by the fact that I was on television before I got into gaming, and I have more access than the average person. I have a platform. I have an outlet. It is easier for me to be heard. Not so much heated, but heard. I mean, I lecture at a college. That's more than most people get. My ideas are given merit by a system. I have to recognize that is not the normal experience. The normal experience is basically gamers are ignored and ridiculed, and I completely understand why they get angry periodically. It's the same thing. You have to recognize why someone would be having a heightened reaction instead of just, dismissing that reaction as extreme or aggressive or whatever. Being aggressive is not against the law. Yelling at someone is not against the law if you're not threatening to beat them up. If all that happened was a mother yelled at a woman for accusing her child of stuff, that does not warrant calling the police. But this woman called the police. Now we have to ask, why did this white woman confronting a Black family have such an overreaction and then not realize that in her apology for falsely accusing the kid, I'm sorry isn't enough, and saying I'm not racist isn't enough? I think the burden of proof in this case for a woman that invoked a racist stereotype about Black women, and again, that is undeniable. Whether she was conscious of that stereotype is a different thing. Again, I argue that in a city as diverse as New York, there is a responsibility to know about these stereotypes. I'm still learning about certain ones, but even I know that one, right? But when you invoke a racist stereotype, I'm not racist doesn't cut it. if she was actually concerned about her public face, her reputation, she'd have to do better than that. And recognizing that intentionally or not, she did invoke a racist stereotype in her argument about why it was warranted to call the police. Because going, hey, is one thing. Calling the cops on that family in an area of heightened tension between black people and the police, there's so much wrong with this. And what's so frustrating is the people on Twitter were like, it has nothing to do with race. The minute you invoke a racist stereotype, it has something to do with race, specifically what is up for debate. But it is undeniable that her argument to the police about why this was bad hinged at least in part on the angry and aggressive black woman stereotype, and that is racist. Perhaps unintentionally, but the stereotype she invoked is racist. Gingers get the same thing. We're always accused of being angry or fiery or this thing. It's like, screw off. People of all different hair colors get angry. People of all different skin colors get angry. It's just noted more when the person is a stereotyped group. The same way when gamers get angry and they're upset about something, it's treated differently. It is delegitimized. That anger is seen as not as important because they're a stereotyped group. That's the way bigotry works, folks. So I'm sure I'm going to take crap for this, but if you enjoyed this, if you thought it was useful, help support this channel, become a monthly patron, patreon.com/LeannaK. It helps me out a lot, especially the next couple months. It has been very expensive for me recently. But even if you don't agree, you notice I said multiple times, there are many points. Feel free to disagree. So don't freak out, because if you're going to argue that criticizing someone for their aggression, hinging on the angry black woman stereotype, isn't racist, then maybe you should watch your own anger. If you're just going to rip into me, well, why is it okay for you to be angry, but this boy's mother wasn't? So try to do it without the fuel. Try to do it without the temper, because that doesn't get us anywhere. These things are complicated. They're nuanced. They're murky, and fighting with each other doesn't get us one step closer to a collective set of standards for this sort of thing. Okay? Okay. Thanks for watching.